Come on, Councillor Stewart, can you hear us? This is new. Councillor Stewart, can you hear us?
It's the difference.
Thank you.
Councillor Steer zooming in.
I just texted him.
Few more seconds. Okay. 11 o'clock, calling the meeting to order. I acknowledge that the District of Tofino operates within the territory of the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation. Notice to attendees, meeting is being video recorded and will be published on this channel. Notice to virtual attendees to sign up for public comment and question period using the Q&A function in Zoom. To register, participants are required to enter the full name, residential address, agenda item you wish to speak to. And through unanimous consent, if there are no objections, I move that section 15 of the District of Tofino Meeting Procedure Bylaw number 1229/2016 is amended. The March 6, 2025 special council meeting be held electronically via Zoom and live broadcast on the District of Tofino's channel, and that the facility provided for the public to watch and hear the meeting be located at Lakewood Sound Theatre, 380 Campbell Street, BC. Seeing no objection, that motion is carried. Also, through unanimous consent, if there are no objections, I move that the March 6, 2025 special council agenda be adopted. Objections, that motion is carried. Public comments on agenda items. Ms. Pochette, I have one person signed up here. Do we have anybody signed up from Zoom land?
Thank you, Mayor Law. I will now make an open call for comments. For those in the gallery who wish to speak, please raise your hand. If there is anyone attending online via Zoom that would like to make a comment, you can just now using the Q&A function. Before making a comment, you will need to state your name, your address, and the agenda item you are speaking to. I will now do a call, calling once, calling twice, calling 3 times. We do have someone signed up online, Lochie MacKenzie.
Lochie MacKenzie. Okay, well, tell you what, we'll go to Ms. Hackett first. She's signed up here in person. Go to Mr. MacKenzie.
Thank you. Samantha Hackett, 700 Ocean Park Drive, and Executive Director of the Tofino Chamber of Commerce, speaking to item 5.1. On February 25th, just a couple weeks ago, the Chamber hosted a roundtable with the food and beverage sector. Thanks so much to district staff for supporting the sector by attending that meeting. At the meeting, businesses shared urgent concerns about the impact of tariffs on suppliers and rising costs. They're not minor increases. Tariffs are and will drive up expenses across the board. This is compounding the struggles businesses have faced through, as we know, COVID, road closures, and inflation, amongst other things. With no room left to absorb these shocks, businesses are being forced to make difficult decisions throughout our community. This is going to affect employment, affordability, and our economic stability overall. Now is not the time for anything that adds any further financial pressures, additional costs, or regulatory burdens that will only accelerate our businesses' closures and our economic downturn. The sharp decline in revenue, whether it's 10, 20, or more percent, puts businesses, workers, and property owners at risk. And if the outcome of these compounding pressures is a significant drop in property values, that impact must be fully considered. Stability should be our priority at this time. The business community remains committed to working together to find solutions that protect both the businesses and the residents. And as decisions are made, the reality of these economic challenges cannot be ignored. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Moving on
Good morning. Can you hear me?
You can. Got just your name, address.
Okay, my name's Lochie MacKenzie, 365 Neil Street, Tofino. I'm a local small business owner. Also like to speak to 5.1. Currently, President Trump is making concerted effort to destabilize the Canadian economy through aggressive tariffs with the goal of beating us into submissive position to facilitate a takeover. This is a time for Canadians to stand together and support one another. Leaders across the country are currently rallying and doing everything in their power to support their constituents in the face of this tariff threat. Currently, Mayor Law and some councillors are making an effort to drive the Tofino real estate market down in an attempt to redistribute investment wealth. Recently,
I just want to make sure that you're speaking to the item that's on the agenda. We want to speak to something other than the item on the agenda or make connections.
So I'm speaking to the threat of tariffs.
Okay, keep it on, please.
Okay, so can I just make sure that my time was paused there, because I do have a comment that sort of fits the 2-minute schedule.
You can carry on. You have 2 minutes, including my comment.
Okay, recently the COVID shock on world economies facilitated a massive wealth reallocation from the middle class to the ultra wealthy on a worldwide scale. I believe it is likely that the mayor's wealth reallocation policies, coupled with the president's tariffs, could reallocate a significant amount of wealth.
Mr. MacKenzie.
Why do you keep interrupting me? I'm speaking to the agenda item. This is about tariffs.
This is not about your comments on, to quote, the wealth. What is it? The wealth reassignment. Please keep it on point to tariffs on the agenda item, or I will have to cut you off and move to the next.
Okay, so I guess I'll go off script then, and I'll just say that I think these tariffs are going to have a major impact on Tofino. I think that there are likely going to be unintended consequences of additional regulations coming into place at the same time as these tariffs. I think that there's this is posing a real destabilization of our local economy, and I really would strongly ask that the mayor and council do what they can to support locals and local business people. Thank you.
Let's open it up to questions from the gallery. We do have a little bit of time left, so we'll keep it to comments germane to the agenda items.
I don't think there is anybody else signed up for comments.
Okay, once, twice, 3 times comments from the gallery. Okay, then we'll move on to presentations and reports. 5.1 tariff impact assessment report from all divisions.
Hey, good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm Nyla Etienne, your Chief Administrative Officer. Today, Council is going to hear from a tariff task force that we struck in early February, with the main scope of that task force being to assess the impacts of tariffs potentially at the time being imposed by the US and Canada, and how that may affect our budgets, essentially. The situation has changed. It is dynamic. This was a preliminary look at the impacts. We require more time to do a deeper dive into how this will impact our supply chains and may require budget adjustments throughout the year. You will hear from the staffing group first, and then you will hear from the Chief Financial Officer, who will talk about the projections for our 2025 to 2029 financial plan. I'd like to emphasize that we are taking our time when looking at this. We are moving very slowly and carefully, but taking a very serious look at this. The recommendations that you'll see that we will include in the March 27th draft of our financial plan are a very careful and conservative set of recommendations that we will be implementing into the plan. Several of us were here during COVID. I was the financial officer at the time. We did put several financial measures in place, and some of those financial measures would have been better suited a couple years after the COVID restrictions and the pandemic was in place. So we took that into consideration, acknowledging and recognizing that this is a very different situation, but has some similarities. As I mentioned, we're monitoring the situation. As the situation changes and new information comes out, we're going back to reports that are being released by the Bank of Canada so that we move forward as cautiously and conservatively as possible. There will be time at the end of the presentation for council to have a discussion related to policy and potential adjustments to procurement policies, and a look at that going forward. With the limited amount of time we had to do a preliminary look, we're not offering any recommendations to make adjustments to our procurement policies at this stage. We certainly need more time to look into that, but do invite council to weigh in on that discussion at the end of the presentation. So I will pass it on now to our task force, who is standing here behind me. They will present their report and recommendations, and then the financial officer will come up to do a further analysis of those with some recommendations for the financial plan. Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. So as the CEO mentioned, today we'll go through an impact assessment on the tariffs. First off, we'll describe the terms of reference established, a bit of background, review of tariffs, and their impacts on the municipality through capital projects, operating budgets, and a macroeconomic look. Finally, we will provide the task force recommendations to the directors and CAO, followed by the Chief Financial Officer's presentation. So, as the CEO mentioned, on February 7th, the CEO established a task force to conduct an initial analysis of the potential tariffs to be imposed by the USA and Canada and how they may impact the District of Tofino. This group will be the first step in analyzing those potential impacts. And the team was comprised of my fellow colleagues here today, the Manager of Financial Services, Laura Morehouse, Manager of Infrastructure and Capital Projects, Simon Kirkland, Public Works Superintendent Trish Dixon, and myself, the Manager of Legislative Services. And the mandate outlined for this group comprised of conducting a review of the tariffs to fully understand the scope and their impacts, to conduct a review of the District of Tofino supply chains and how they may be impacted by the tariffs, to assess the potential qualitative and quantitative impacts the tariffs may have on the municipality and the services provided, and to consider other retaliatory actions. Finally, we were set out to determine a set of recommendations to the CEO and directors within 15 days of February 4th. So a bit of background, as council is well aware, on February 1st, the US president announced tariffs on Canadian goods and services. Canada then announced a list of retaliatory tariffs. And on February 3rd, negotiations were successful between both governments in delaying the tariffs by 30 days, at which point on February 7th, the task force was established, mandated by those terms of reference just outlined. And finally, 2 days ago, on March 4th, those tariffs were imposed. So a quick review on tariffs themselves. Tariffs is a tax imposed on goods and services as it enters a country. It's applied at that port of entry. It's important to note that the revenue is collected by that host country and that a tariff can be applied multiple times if the good crosses the border more than once. So this is important to note for complex products like vehicles with multiple components that are produced on both sides of the border. And then finally, at the time of drafting this report, the task force based their assumptions and recommendations only on the proposed US and Canadian counter tariffs, did not include any potential further escalatory countermeasures or US reciprocal tariffs. And with that, I will pass it on to my colleague, Ms. Dixon.
Ms. McCall. Yeah.
As for operating budget impacts, our responses from major suppliers came with levels of uncertainty at the time of this initial discussion, from no disruptions at this time to potential cost implications to the customer. For alternative suppliers, it's important to note that many of our suppliers' goods do not originate in the US, although as the tariffs proceed, some current products, Canadian and otherwise, could be driven up as demand increases. Some projects then maybe need to be substituted and potentially sourced from the US. We discussed pre-purchasing. We discussed this option and will consider for some products such as toilet paper through availability of limited dry storage will need to be considered. This is a similar directive that we had during COVID when supplies were delayed and in limited stock. Substitution impacts is something that we considered, as if we were to substitute some products from any other different source. An example such could be as toilet paper. In 2024, we purchased 120 cases of Scott toilet paper distributed across 48 Scott toilet paper dispensers. All of these dispensers would have to be replaced to accommodate the different product. This assumption of additional financial impacts would also include some of our other janitorial products. I'll now turn it over to Mr. Kirkland to discuss the operational impacts to our water and sewer budgets. Thank you.
As I'll talk primarily about the capital projects, but as Ms. Dixon indicated, so similar on the water and sewer side of the operational budget, we've had similar responses from the various suppliers, material suppliers for water and sewer. We've pre-purchased as much product, primarily chemicals and dosing stuff that we can to exceed as much as its shelf life as we can, or as they can. In terms of substituting any products, it's pretty challenging because a lot of the dosing chemicals that we use are specific to what we've had pre-trial testing for. So in terms of reacting quickly, as Ms. Hackett indicated earlier, we want to take our time. We don't want to just rush and change chemicals just with the uncertainty economically right now. With respect to capital works projects, so worked with all the various project managers within the district to do an assessment of the current 2025 projects that we have on a line-by-line basis to create a unique contingency for with respect to tariffs, the tariff risk for each capital works project. This year, there's a heavy emphasis on planning and design going forward for further major infrastructure projects. So not as significant immediate risk there. Those kind of risks we'll further assess when we move into the 2026 financial planning period. Pre-purchasing things where possible. For example, for the community hall kitchen, we've pre-purchased a lot of the appliances that are going to be coming down with that project. And as we move forward, we'll liaise very closely with the building community to ensure that budgets and risks and opportunities are developed in collaboration there. Pass it off to Ms. Morehouse to continue with the macroeconomics slide.
Morning. So in addition to reviewing our capital budgets and our operating budgets, we also looked at the following macroeconomic impacts or potential impacts. We looked to the Bank of Canada projections for any potential effects on both short and long-term inflation, as well as any impacts on the Canadian dollar. We reached out to both Tourism Tofino and the Chamber of Commerce to get a sense of any anticipated impacts on tourism and the local business community. And we also reached out to other local governments to look at what other communities are doing now similar to us in relation to any potential impacts of tariffs on their financial plans. And with that, we developed a set of recommendations that are listed here. So to increase operating contingency by 25% in the general sewer and water funds, to increase capital project budgets based on the individual project analysis, and to look at increasing future years inflationary budget based on the Bank of Canada projections. And with that, I will turn it over to our financial officer.
Also, I will continue the presentation from the task force and take the group through the next steps and impacts that the recommendations shown on the screen earlier will have on the financial. For the next few slides, we will look at the 2025 to 2029 financial plan impact. We will start with the assessments that was done by our CEO and the group of directors on such recommendations. Will be followed by the current position that Bank of Canada has, and followed by the estimated financial impacts of such recommendations. In addition to that, we will put forward for April revenue anticipation borrowing bylaw that will be brought in the front of council, and we will end up with the next steps. And throughout the slides, please stop me, and any questions or comments are more than welcome. In the assessment of the three recommendations, starting with the first one, the increase of 25% of contingencies, the main aspects related to such increases consideration was the uncertainty in the economy and how that will affect our local budget. And looking at such aspects of the economy, the conclusion was that such contingencies will have to be taken as a recommendation, and further into the presentation, council will see how the values will be addressed and present in the financial plan. The second recommendation, addressing the budget of certain capital projects. The risk is there as certain materials prices might increase. And within a couple of slides, the council will see which projects will be considered for an increase and how that will be addressed. The third recommendation, the inflation percentages used in the financial plan 2025-2029, following the current forecasts coming from the Bank of Canada. Those have been reviewed and addressed appropriately. And would like also to mention that Bank of Canada is our source of truth when it comes down to recommendations and any steps that we are taking in our construction of the financial plan. Looking at what Bank of Canada is saying at this point, again, the situation is volatile and they might come up with further announcements. But as of today, Bank of Canada position is saying that the implemented tariffs will affect four things. First, will reduce exports. Second, it will reduce the business investment. Third will be decrease in demand, and the fourth is going to be a decrease in spending. The tool at their use is the monetary policy, and that's what Bank of Canada will use. And the principal way of doing that is through interest rates. Again, based on Bank of Canada announced is that it can go between low interest rates and high interest rates because there are two aspects to be addressed: supporting demands and keeping the inflation on a temporary basis. So that will result in a change in their decision, but that will be something to be seen in the future, and more recently on March 12th, when Bank of Canada will announce their new. I put also on the slide a quote from the governor, and the sentiment here is balanced. This is what Bank of Canada is trying to do, is hold the line, making sure that we do have a solid plan to go through this time. Diving into the recommendations, I will start with the first one, the increase operating contingencies. And going through the values, 25% will bring a total of $71,000. And that value may have two financing sources. The first one being the Financial Stability Reserve Fund. Further to that, this fund was established to stabilize the impact of downturns and operating cost increases. Second being the General Surplus Reserve Fund. Adding to that, the current 2025 to 2029 financial plan is not yet balanced, meaning that would be another way of addressing such increases. Moving on to the second recommendation, increasing capital budgets. I created two slides. First, we will look at the projects that are part of the Resort Municipality Initiative group. These are not, this is a group of projects that in order to address the increases, which at this point we have it at 138,000, addressing that will happen through rescheduling of current and future RMI projects. Regarding the second group, which are projects based on in our budget, it will have the same approach, maybe financed from the two sources mentioned earlier. Also, again, balancing the budgets is another option that will be looked into in addressing such increases. Also would like to mention that the values that you see on the screen of increases estimated impact refers to 2025. So these projects are to incur in 2025, and the values to be added is for 2025 fiscal year. In terms of inflationary increases, we had a small change from the recommendations being brought up by the task force, only because since the report was presented, there were tariffs being implemented, and that changed the recommended increase for 2025. So initially was no increase, but after the tariffs being implemented, we are recommending an increase of 0.5%. As Council can see on the screen, we're anticipating an increase of inflation this fiscal. And from there, there's a jump in 2026. That comes mostly from a sharp increase in prices. And that will reflect to some points this fiscal, but the expectation is that will bleed more so into 2026, and that will create that jump into proposed and forecasted inflation for 2026. After that, we are looking at a more stable, if you will, inflationary rate. At this point, it's at 2.5 from 2027 to 2029. But that will be obviously revised and reviewed into the next year when we'll deal with 2026 financial plan. I would like also to mention that that the council has the ability to amend financial plan at any point. And again, we are aligning our recommendations and adjustments with Bank of Canada predictions and their signals through the market. In addition to that, we also had a look at the fuel and hydro budget, and based on the information provided by the task force, the assessment was that there would be a need for an increase. And as we can see on the screen, we are projecting a 4% increase in hydro for the proposed 2025 fiscal year, an increase of 4% since January 23rd, when we had the last presentation on the financial plan in front of council. I separated the cost for treatment plants, just so for the council to see the actual value, and the increase will be based for the other group of hydro expenses. In terms of fuel, again, we have the January 23rd value. To that, we are assessing a 5% increase. And at the same time, looking at Statistics Canada, what they are showing to us is it was a bit of a bump during the last year spring, but overall is a slight increase. And would like also to mention that being a volatile price, this will be an expense that will be closely monitored by staff. Regarding the anticipation borrowing bylaw, just a quick reminder to council. It's intended to cover the operating expenditures. The value is 75% of taxes levied in previous fiscal year, not to be used for long-term borrowing needs or capital financing, and will be brought forward to council consideration in April. Again, this anticipation borrowing bylaw is a tool that provincial government provides municipalities to manage cash flow risk in every year. So would like to highlight the fact that this is the main role to manage cash flow. Moving on to the policy considerations, we do have a couple of items here, starting with purchasing and disposition of assets policy, which council can look at as well in terms of recommendations to change. Also, we do have the social procurement network, which basically provides tools and expertise required to integrate social procurement into existing purchasing practices. And would like to open the floor for council to discuss or any comments or directions in terms of policies to be looked at by the staff.
Thank you. I just have a question. You want some questions right now? Is it?
Sure.
Just go back to the financial stability reserve. What is in that reserve? Is that balance?
The current value is 120,000.
And what was the total potential to draw from that? That was not.
So looking back into a very big calculation, we do have about 71,000 for the 25% increase into the contingency. So obviously that can be covered. In regards to the other group, which obviously goes above the 120,000, that's where general surplus reserve fund comes in place. And again, to highlight the word may, where we're looking also into balancing the budget. That will be our first focus. And then turning our attention towards the two reserve funds.
Tatiana?
Yeah, thank you for the question through the chair to council. This it's very difficult at this time to really determine what will happen with the capital projects. And so leaning on the financial stability reserve is a wise decision. It's why the reserve fund was established, was to manage and get ready if there was any risk associated with our budgets. And that can be operating or it can be capital. So what we'll likely see in the next draft of the financial plan are the project values are going to remain the same as they were presented on January 23rd, with reference and leaning on this stability reserve if it's needed. And we won't know what will happen until we go out to market. But to refrain from tendering projects without knowing what's going to happen in the market is not necessary at this point in time. It is largely a planning year, as Mr. Kirkland mentioned in the infrastructure department. So there's very little risk in terms of proceeding with some of those design projects. And where we're looking at this capital risk, it's much smaller than we had anticipated. So between the stability reserve and the general surplus reserve, we should be okay. The use of the surplus reserve will likely top up the financial stability reserve. So to bring up that balance to make sure that we have our risk covered off is likely what we will be doing.
And just maybe one more follow-up question. What goes into the stability reserve, financial stability reserve fund every year? Is there a set amount or? So
that's a good question, and we haven't adopted our reserve fund policy yet, but that will reference what our base level should be for that reserve fund. So we've kept it at 70,000 per year historically. This year we need to bump up that value, and it's largely contributed with surplus funds.
Open it up to council for questions. We maybe just to frame it a little bit for council for policy discussions. Are you opening it up for potential policy discussions right now, or do we get to frame that a little more for council? So
right now, absolutely. If council would
maybe because we've got three bullet points here. Why don't you leave them up there? That's all right. And just give council a little background so that we can do one at a time, and maybe council then can have a little bit of a depth to in their comments too.
Sure. Yeah. We've been hearing across the province and across the country some references to amending procurement policies to buy Canadian only. And we are hesitant to recommend that at this time. We've done an analysis of where we can receive products from or where we can purchase products from. What impacts operationally, it may mean if we change equipment sort of down the line, it can become quite costly. We have standardized equipment in place for multiple facilities. If we change a type of toilet paper and we have to change out all of that equipment, it could end up costing more sort of down the line. That's just one example, and I think we can probably provide many more, but at this time, I think we need to just slow down a little bit before we are able to recommend to council to have very specific language to buy Canadian only in our policy. But we can, certainly would like to hear from council about how far or what council's thoughts are in terms of where we want to go with that. And then we have to take it away and analyze it a bit more thoroughly, longer than it would take between 15 and 30 days that we've had to bring this report forward. So we really wanted to just touch base with council on our procurement policies and see if there's any sort of sentiment there for us to look into that further, or if there's any sort of strong opinions around the council table in terms of what we should be looking at.
And forgive me, one more question for council. I know we went through the impacts and stuff like that, but do we have an idea for each, like, what are the percentages that we rely on the US for products and services? Like, is there, I know it doesn't seem like a giant impact, so far. It's significant, but presumably that impact reflects the amount of US products that we're using.
Not necessarily. I think it varies from year to year. If we were to look at this when we were embarking on building the wastewater treatment plant, this analysis would look quite different. I think it's largely going to be dependent on what we have in our plans year to year. So we have to continue with that examination. We don't have an average percentage for the 2025 budget. Certainly something that we're going to dig into and be able to come back with more definitive information, but we don't have that for you today.
A couple more questions, but I'm going to just open it up to council. Why don't we go down the line? Start. Councillor Thomas.
I don't have any questions. I just think I have a comment. So I do feel I definitely understand what you're saying about slowing down. I agree with that before we change any policies, but I do believe that because we're a tourist town, if we support fellow Canadians, I feel like that money then comes back to us in the long run. And so I feel like it is of value to look at some of the decision making and I guess come back and maybe discuss it later.
Master.
Yeah, I'd be reluctant to support buying Canadian only, but I do think we should be looking at Canadian alternatives, seeing what the impact would be on that specific item or project. So it's probably a tolerance level, but I think, as you mentioned, talking about toilet roll holders, that's a good example. But I think, and I just say Canadian only would be cutting our own throat. But I think we should be looking at Canadian alternatives when we can. And I think we should be doing that anyway.
Yes, I agree that we should definitely, roughly what Councillor McMaster said, we should be looking at a Canadian preference, at least for purchasing. There's going to be a number of things affecting that. The Canadian dollar could be changing, so our dollars could go farther, I think, with Canadian purchasing at times. And we need to be able to have some flexibility within that. So like a purely buy only Canadian policy might not always work. So it's going to take, I guess, some careful management of purchasing throughout the whole budget year. And that will take extra effort and work. I'm also in favor of looking into social procurement and wherever we can to support local businesses in purchasing I think that's an important thing as well. What's kind of missing in this presentation today was I didn't see if there's no impact on taxes, or if the tax impact will come when we refurbish that reserve in a future budget, or that impact isn't really spelled out really clearly to me. I'm a little bit reluctant to react strongly and use all of that reserve right at the front of this tariff announcement, because it is going to be, we're seeing it already changing on a daily basis. And I would like to be able to have enough of that reserve and not go back to taxes to cover it off if we're reacting further in this budget cycle. So there's some, that's why we have that reserve, to be able to be flexible within a budget year for things that are unknown coming. And I think there are more unknown things coming. So to the extent that we can reduce spending to cover that off, since the budget is not adopted, I'm also in favor of, I know we've squeezed it a lot to bring it down as much as we can. But if we're looking at, inside of the size of our budget, 120,000 might be able to be found elsewhere. I don't know. Yeah, so I think that's about it. I'm wondering if there will be any reaction from markets and from BC Hydro if suddenly they're looking at selling more hydro in BC. Maybe that there might be some provincial changes in how hydro is priced. Provincial users. That would be something that maybe political level council could lobby for, or ask those kind of questions at least. Certainly there's energy policy in Canada, and how it's sold to the States is going to be changing, possibly. We've already heard talk of that. So there's a lot of moving parts as we go forward. And as you introduced, our reaction to COVID was fairly strong at the front, and we needed more flexibility further down the road, and we didn't have so much of that by having a strong reaction at the front of that crisis. So I think we need to save some of our tools for anything that might come in the future. That's my thoughts.
Councillor Sawyer. Yes, go. Oh.
Hi. I agree.
Sorry, Miss Atiana has a comment here. Let's maybe reply to Councillor Anderson before we go to you.
Thank you. Apologies for interrupting, but I don't want to lose my train of thought with some of the questions and comments that Councillor Anderson had. I think I really want to say here today that we are similar to what we said at the last budget meeting. We're going to try to work with the tax increase that's been adopted in the current financial plan, which is, I believe it's about 6.63%. We're still aiming for that. I mean, while this is not a time to put, severe or significant measures in place like we did during COVID, it's not going to help the community at a time like this to come forward with excessive tax increases. And so we are thinking about that, and we are still working towards trying to balance the budget within the parameters that council has adopted. We can't say the same for future years. I think that when we look at a 3.5% inflation in 2026, there's going to be a significant amount of pressure on our services, and we have to think about how we are going to fund that. I agree with not relying too heavily on the reserve funds in this first year. I think there'll be limited impact on the reserve funds when we see our risk levels sitting at just over $200,000. I think safe place for not leaning too heavily on those reserves and risking future years where we need to put additional measures in place.
Thank you. Councillor Sawyer.
Thank you. I agree with Councillor Anderson in that it's good we're looking at all these angles right now, but I don't want to make any long-reaching decisions. I think the situation's fluid and it can change for the better, for worse, or in ways that we can't anticipate yet. Overall, I would just be in favor of looking at projects that, even though I know we don't like to defer things because it's always more expensive to do it down the line. But we may be in situations where it's more important to focus on the necessary functions of the district and then look at future projects after that. So that is how I feel. Stay flexible and just be cautious with any spending decisions right now.
I think that, you know, a procurement policy, I think that it's clear that the US is no longer a reliable supplier. I'll agree that it's very unstable. I would be, you know, I got the direction to take it slow and be very careful, but I would also, you know, use the toilet roll holder as a good example. You know, is it possible to pick things that are clearly relying on the US and start a conversion program and say, like, you know, that might be a good pitch to the provincial and federal government, because they're bringing in 25% tariffs. Say, hey, look, you know, as a municipality, we're going to try to do this, and it's going to cost to convert to Canadian, you know, Canadian products that are supplied with Canadian, you know, supplies, and then to start that process, because I think this is going to be a long road. I don't think it's going to become reliable, stable anytime soon. It certainly doesn't look like it. So I think it would be prudent to look at those sort of things and then cost them out. And personally, I think, you know, with the Canadian dollar, as you've noticed, it's, you know, it might go lower against the American dollar, and the inflation goes up, and cost, of course, 25% tariffs may become 50% if they cross the border twice, like toilet paper. I think, you know, I think we really have to look at that and say, well, we need a, you know, I would certainly support a vision to start the process of converting, even if it costs us something. It doesn't look like you know, there's a huge cost to the tariffs, but I think that I would like to see that, actually. That would be prudent. And to start that ball rolling, even if it's just the beginning. So maybe I differ a little bit from Mr. Council. That's what I would do.
I do agree with you. I think that is probably, I think one thing we can think is that the US is no longer a secure place to get our supplies. So I do think that is a pretty valuable thing to look into.
And maybe just another comment. I know we have you know, when we go into the financial planning process, we've talked about, for instance, a flail, you know, fairly expensive flail machine. What is it called? What is it?
Multi-hog.
The multi-hog. Here you go. I mean, that's a good example of, you know, how do we look at that in the lens of an unreliable US trading partner? Is that, you know, if we do purchase that, is it going to go up in price? You know, all of the parts that come maybe across the border twice. So then, you know, that's a particular one that I would prefer to see. Like, does that change? Does that put us at risk in the future? You know, the next 4 or 5 years or 10 years, its whole lifespan. What does the you know, what does the long-term cost and risk include? And maybe that might change our procurement. Maybe we could get a different product. So maybe you talked about that a little bit, touched on that, but, you know, specifics like that, that's what I would like to see.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. I love talking about anytime there's $250,000 piece of equipment. Yeah, I think that, that one did come up during our conversations and it similar to what some other council members are saying, just in response to having a look at where we're buying from and when we're buying it. We may see some projects move earlier in the financial plan so that we can take advantage of a year where we're not going to see this impact as heavily as we will 1 year and 2 years down the road, and which will last probably be there forever if the tariffs remain as is. So I think multi-cause, we have an opportunity to purchase a piece of equipment that's sitting in Canada and it's not going to be impacted by the tariffs. I don't know if that's necessarily still the case, but if that's going to be the situation, we may move up the purchase of equipment or move up the taking on a capital project in 2025 versus 2026. So we're still thinking through the timelines and the mechanics of all of that. So you may see some changes with the timelines in the financial plan, and we'll dig into more on specific projects like the multi-hug and some of the other capital projects during that meeting on the 27th of March.
I have another comment on I like the idea of moving up projects. I do understand, like, noting the potential impacts that we've seen and the numbers involved, and knowing we have a financial reserve, and I understand that that's 1 year's look, and this could be a very long road likely. And the option, of course, when you do the financial plan, is to pull some pull some projects, but I do think that does mean that a business loses out on that project. So that does, so what I'm saying is, if we have the ability within the 6.63 within that to do a project, I think it would probably be prudent to do it, because the cost is going to go up most likely if we wait, and also that's a business that then doesn't get a job. So so that's just a comment.
Yeah, if I may, I appreciate the discussion, and reflecting on what we did during COVID, we reduced service levels, we moved out projects, and we ended up paying for it. The monies that's sitting in our reserve funds right now are quite valuable to us, and they're going to become less valuable very quickly if the projections turn out the way we do. So we're certainly not looking at reducing service levels. We're not looking at moving out projects, and we'll be very clear as to why we won't do that as we move through this process. It may feel or seem counterintuitive, but it's very important for us to make sure we take advantage of the year that we have and plan very carefully for the services and the projects that we offer to the community.
I have one more comment, but I'm going to open it up to council. Councilor Sawyer, I don't want to miss you up there. Nope, nothing.
No comment.
Councilor Anderson, any final comments?
Well, I don't want to be flippant, but maybe because I'm the oldest one in the room, and also having been through a few trade wars in the UK. As Winston Churchill says, every crisis also brings opportunity. And I think it's, just going to weather the storm. I appreciate what staff's doing and trying to be prepared. There's going to be hiccups, but, life goes on, we'll get through this. It'll sort itself out.
Councilor Solomon, any further final comments?
Pretty well covered by everybody else said. I had no questions at the beginning, so I was like, oh, I have nothing, but everybody else said comments that I probably would have shared. I think I would agree with trying to look at things through a lens to see what we could replace with down the road. Not putting in, like, as you were saying, like maybe it's the toilet paper rolls and it's not something we make a snap decision on, but we look at that because if we're not thinking about it, you might end up in a position where you end up having to make that change. And it'd just be better to have a plan going forward for it. And it would be nice to see a focus on local products where we could. I know sometimes that's a big financial decision though.
Councilor Anderson?
I'm just wondering, Mr. Chair, if staff is looking for any direction, specific direction around the Buy Canadian policy. There seems to be some agreement around the council table. Wonder if we need to develop a policy or if what council has said is enough to guide staff purchasing. Where are we going?
It's a great segue. I was gonna say, let's do that. I think we have sort of some direction. The general tendency to want to move towards buying Canadian, but to do it in a thoughtful, careful way. I also want to just open up for council as we talk about this, that it's not just a financial decision based on an unstable trading partner. It's also, it's also a message to our fellow Canadians that we support them and we're ready to take a hit for something that's important. It may be a hit, so maybe that's something that council should also express to staff. Are we as a town, as a district, willing to take somewhat of a hit to make a statement? That's the other question.
Thank you for the comments. We don't need any direction today. I am hearing council's comments. I've taken notes. Anytime we amend a policy, we bring it back to a committee of the whole for detailed discussion on the existing policy, and we go through that policy with council. We talk about some aspects that we want to amend and adjust in consideration of council's comments today. So that will happen over the coming months, likely sometime during the summer. Once the plan is adopted, it's not going to happen through the financial planning process, but I think we have enough direction here today to start working on some draft language to leave flexibility in the policy, but consider our current supply chains and consider how we can buy as local as possible. And yes, hearing the comments that it's not just a financial decision, there's I think we have what we need to work on this and let me get back to the future.
Super. One last round for council. Any further final comments? No. Seeing none. Is everybody happy? We've got pretty good direction. So moving towards some draft language. Great.
I think that's it. The last slide was just a question slide, but I feel like we've covered.
Also the next steps.
Oh, there was next step. Okay, sure.
And in terms of next steps, we're looking at 4 major dates, starting with March 27th, where we'll have the 3rd special council budget meeting. On April 1st, we are planning to introduce the revenue anticipation borrowing bylaw through a regular council meeting. April 15th, we'll bring to a regular council meeting the introduction of the financial plan and tax rates bylaws. And on May 6th, during a special council meeting, we'll have the adoption of financial plan and tax rates bylaws. And that is the solution.
I think we've covered most of our questions. So thanks for standing up there for comments and questions. Okay, so all right. That brings us to the end.
Question.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So Diana, it sounds like the reciprocal tariffs are going to be the key thing that are coming in April, supposedly. So I just wondered whether we'll have time to incorporate that in your schedule.
So the task force is going to continue working on this matter. I think as new information becomes available, we have to revisit it. The financial officer mentioned that council has the ability to amend their financial plan bylaw throughout the year, and the purpose of that comment was to remind us that whatever we adopt in the first draft of the financial plan, we can have a closer look at and amend
later throughout the year when more information becomes available. We will take as much information as we can and incorporate it into the adopted version, but I think this is going to be a year similar to 2021 where we have to consider some amendments to the plan in Q2 or Q3.
Super. Okay. And is there, we did talk briefly, one last thing, we did talk briefly about the potential to lobby the federal and provincial government. Is that something that staff need direction on, or is that something that we can discuss?
I did make a note for us to discuss potential things we may want to bring to UBCM in the fall. This may be a more urgent matter that we want to talk about prior to September. So I think that I'll put some thought to that and come back to council at a later date to talk about what we need.
And here's one question. Maybe it's a little, maybe for this may impact. I know the Tofino Housing Corporation is projects sort of in the beginning stages, and I can see that impacts to those projects could be significant. Is there a role for council to play in that, or just throwing it out there?
Really think we have to see how far we go with these next two projects.
Okay.
I question whether one's going to go myself.
Okay. All right. That's it for me. All right. Then we're on to question period. Ms. Pilchat?
Very long, I'm not able to call for questions. For those in the gallery who wish to speak, please raise your hand. If there is anyone attending online via Zoom that would like to ask a question, you can do so now using the Q&A function. Before asking a question, you will need to state your name, your address, and the agenda item you are speaking to. I will now do a calling once, calling twice, calling 3 times.
Great.
Public.
Ms. Hackett?
Thank you. Excuse me, Samantha Hackett, 700 Ocean Park Drive, and still with the chamber. So just given the conversation and the economic uncertainties strains by the tariffs discussed, I'm just wondering any additional ideas that Mayor and Council are exploring to reduce any and all of the unnecessary burdens and the multiplier effects that these cause on our economy, businesses, and residents.
I mean, we have to keep it to the agenda item, which is basically an assessment by staff on the effects of tariffs on operational and capital costs for the district, and so that's what we're looking at. I think that, of course, council is going to consider effects on community as a whole. We'll see how those go. I mean, we don't know yet what that will be. So that's something we'll probably draw on the Chamber of Commerce and Tourism Tofino and look specifically at tourism and other things. So I don't really answer for you at this time.
Maybe just a note then to make sure that's top of mind.
Absolutely.
Can I have a follow-up question?
Sure.
Just because with the concerns with the tariffs impacting revenues to businesses, especially property owners and things, and it was mentioned about the almost 7% tax increase, specifically coming from the district. That's just in 2025 alone. With this concern, is there anything being done specifically of how this is being monitored or other factors also threatening the drop of the homeowners' equity piece of it for businesses?
Give me a little clearer question. So
Yeah, I mean, it might be something staff are already doing, but just because of multiple increases happening, so but specifically taxes increased. I know it's happening from the district and from ACRD. Is that being monitored in relation to affordability of land? So owners, businesses owning land, taxes are going up. Revenues or the threat to expenses for businesses are going, revenues are going down, maybe expenses are going up for businesses. Now their affordability of actually owning their land and being able to run a business in Tofino.
Yeah, I don't have that information right now.
No,
Are we
is
going
it being
to,
monitored? Like,
is it?
is that
being
something that
monitored?
maybe, and maybe it's a few there, like I know in that timeline, maybe it's a few future consideration to just be putting something into place to be looking at that relationship and actually keeping track of what's happening economically for the business community, which I mean, it'd be for residents as well, but with the relation to equity.
Yeah, I don't mean, answer for you at this time. But we do, through the financial planning process, we're very, very careful to keep giving services and increase services and cover those with as little impact to the taxpayer as possible. That's always top of mind. We have those conversations, and members of the public are, invited to be part of that process, of the financial planning process. That is a great time for businesses and community members to come in and say, or the Chamber of Commerce, Tourism Tofino, and we can discuss the economy, state of the economy, and stuff like that at that time. It's a really good place for that.
Thank you.
Do you want to again?
Yeah,
do you
just
have an
add
answer to
that. I mean, I'll just say that the district did have a small sort of a economic development kind of function through our committee and some of the work that we did. And currently we don't have anything like that monitors markets or looks at, and we rely heavily on Tourism Tofino and the Chamber as partners to bring forward that kind of at this point. So while we sort of we hear voices about it and react to it, there's no specific whatever staff or council function that specifically looks at any markets really and how that impact any impacts and how they affect our community.
I mean, staff does get the MRDT. The MRDT does flow through us for the eligible entities, so very, very close eye on that as one indicator of the economy. So I would see those numbers. We do get those numbers quarterly. At least that's one snapshot. Business licenses, et cetera, et cetera. So Mr. Froment.
Thank you, Jean-Paul Froment, 1223 Howard Drive. Regarding question or regarding item 5.1, directed to Mayor Law. Your campaign message serves as the foundation for support you've received from voters. One of your election campaign messages was to protect and preserve local businesses. Local businesses have been set back by one problem after another in recent years, and we now face worrying impacts and uncertainties as a result of these tariffs. Do you think this is an appropriate time to protect and preserve local businesses and all the residents that will also be affected? Or do you see this as a time to apply additional and unnecessary pressures and burdens to local businesses?
I mean, let's just keep it to, we have to keep it to the agenda item. Right? So the agenda item we're talking about is the tariffs, the impacts. This one is impacts to capital and operating costs for the district. So clearly the council is looking at the impacts to the district, and also by extension, not in this particular presentation. We don't have, I mean, this presentation isn't about an assessment of impacts tariffs will have to local businesses, but it's always top of mind. So that's probably a good question for another time. And I think I see where you're going, but we have to keep the questions to this particular topic.
And my question was related to the topic, and I just want you guys to think about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any further? We got a little bit of time left for questions. If anybody's further, last chance for questions about this agenda topic. Okay, seeing none? All right. That's it, adjournment. So I'll move adjournment from the chair. Second by Councillor Thomas. For the comments on favor.